morning, colleagues. Thanks, Keith, for facilitating what I think has been a really rich session that I have the privilege to speak last in. And I would like to share some learnings, again, through the Sustainable Wildlife Economies project that Candace has introduced to you in terms of unlocking opportunities for meaningful participation of land reform beneficiaries in the wildlife economy here in South Africa. South Africa bucks the global and continental trend of declining biodiversity, wildlife populations, quite radically. It's an outlier. It's not the only outlier. There are others, including in our neighboring countries. But in South Africa, wildlife populations have grown. We've heard this in talks that have already been presented, from about 500,000 about half a century ago to more than 5 million today. That's quite extraordinary. And here you see a map of where those wildlife are. These are wildlife that are on private lands across South Africa. In various forms, it can be broadly categorized into about 1,000 privately protected areas, private land that's actually part of our formal protected area estate. That's about 2% of South Africa's land area, which might not sound like much, but South Africa's only protected about 9% of its land area formally. So that's a significant contribution. But a much more expansive contribution is through the private wildlife ranches. There are over 9,000 of them, covering between 14 and 17% estimated of South Africa's land area. So I think these numbers speak for themselves. And how did this happen? Well, we've also heard that, through some policy changes that devolved wildlife use and ownership rights to landholders on the ground, the economies spoke for themselves. A lot of South Africa's land is arid, it's marginal for farming, and because we've heard about these diverse revenue streams in the wildlife economy space, a lot of farmers transitioned over from livestock to wildlife ranching. So we have this significant wildlife economy. But it's a land-based economy, and like other land-based economies in South Africa, it is a reflection of the injustices of the past, our apartheid era, where the majority of the population, Black individuals, were prevented from owning land. And as a result, the wildlife economy, like other land-based economies, is not yet inclusive of the South African majority. And this is something that is very much recognized. We heard Mr. Matiba speak this morning, the game meat strategy, the biodiversity economy strategy, etc., that are really intentionally trying to grow a more inclusive wildlife economy in South Africa. So we want to grow it, but we want to make it more inclusive. And an opportunity to do this is through South Africa's land reform program, which is addressing the inequities of the past by restituting and redistributing land to previously disadvantaged individuals and communities. So this presents an opportunity for land reform beneficiaries to enter into the wildlife economy. And I've already mentioned that there is interest in this because these economies make sense on land. In many ways, they're much more favorable than livestock in terms of the returns. And we know, working with the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, that there is interest in the wildlife economy from land reform beneficiaries. This is a survey we did in the Eastern Cape as part of the Sustainable Wildlife Economies project of land reform beneficiaries, that in their business plan for being awarded land, these are the activities that they mention wanting to do as part of their business model. And you see in the gray there that they want to do many things, but they want to engage in the wildlife economy in terms of the activities they want to do. Contrast that with the purple, which shows you what they're currently doing. And none of the land reform beneficiaries that we surveyed were currently engaging in the wildlife economy, besides a few that were doing a little bit of meat hunting. And so through the Sustainable Wildlife Economies project, Candace has already mentioned, we collected this wealth of information on the established sector. And the idea here was can we learn from the established sector to help support the emerging sector? I think a difficulty in land reform is that it's very much geared towards agriculture. Extension support is geared towards agriculture. There's a lot more open access information about agriculture and what makes it work, which didn't exist in the wildlife economy space. And so just to give you some examples, this contrasts the size of the land reform property in our survey to the established sector. Candice has already introduced the idea of these different business models in the established sector. The ones on the right are much more specialized business models. The ones in the middle are more mixed, diversity of wildlife revenue activities, and even some that mix livestock with wildlife. And I think you can see quite clearly here that the size of emerging ranches in the Eastern Cape is much more aligned with these mixed wildlife models than I think what's often aspirational is these really specialized models, particularly ecotourism. And we know that they require a lot of land. They also have other barriers to entry. They have the promise of high returns on investment, but they can take a long time to become viable. So in the interim, there's a lot of bankrolling that's needed from other business, etc. And so our hope was that this information from the established sector can help guide these programs to better inform what kinds of businesses might be appropriate for these land reform beneficiaries, particularly entering into the wildlife economy. And here it's also about resilience. Particularly the idea of mixing wildlife and livestock. We saw in COVID some work that we've done that showed that these mixed models were a lot more resilient to a shock. We heard from Carlin, these are volatile wildlife. There's volatility around the pricing of wildlife, etc. So having livestock, for example, on the property can help buffer against some of that volatility entering into the wildlife economy. So what we did with this information, working with the national departments and supported by the French Development Agency, was to package some of this information into actual decision support tools that could help guide. On the left, there is a program that South African National Parks has to loan or donate wildlife to these emerging farmers, something that Clarine will talk about more tomorrow. And so this information is to help guide that process in terms of, what models are viable on which properties, how much wildlife is needed, etc. And yeah, to work towards which business models. And then on the right is an initiative by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, where they've recognized we don't just need wildlife stocks on these properties, there's other infrastructure requirements as well. And so they are trying to mobilize investment into the wildlife economy, particularly to support emerging ranches. And so some of the information again, from the established sector, helped to populate this wildlife economy investment portal to understand, okay, well, what kind of investments are required, what are the likely returns, etc. And so our hope is that this information helps to guide an informed growth, inclusive growth in the wildlife economy in South Africa. And I also talk about it today because I feel, in the interest of this colloquium, that this is an example of the type of research that can be done, bringing together researchers with multiple national level government departments, and importantly also with the ranching sector themselves to build the evidence base, the knowledge base around the wildlife economy that then can be mainstreamed into some of these platforms. Thanks very much.